When you said an ethical mining, and then you still think about extraction. Extraction is basically colonialism. The screen-based technology in the phone was taken from the thin metals in that island. There's a lot of this trauma and memory that you cannot actually heal. I'm Indonesians, and there's a trauma of a colonialism. And then also there's a trauma of a dictatorship. When they died, they cannot bury them. Sometimes they just put them in the water or even in the fridge with the fish. Hello, my name is Riar Rizaldi, and I work as an artist and filmmaker. I am based in Yogyakarta in Indonesia.
Riar Rizaldi is an artist and filmmaker who grew up watching old horror movies screened in the fields of rural Indonesia. Today, he uses the horror genre as a methodology to explore politics and ecology, arguing that modern resource extraction is essentially a form of colonialism. His work reveals the truth about invisible labor and the consequences of capitalism, from ghost stories of deceased sailors to the mining of rare metals found in our smartphones. For Riar, the future is daunting, and technology is inextricably linked to the ghosts of the past. We've come to the Eye Film Museum in Amsterdam to talk with him about how art helps us perceive this world differently.
I grew up in a rural area in Indonesia. Film troops who came to like one village and they erect a screen and they just screen the films in the field. I went there and just to see films, and they mostly screen films that is already like expired in the context of distribution. So it's like an old like 70s, 80s like Hong Kong horror or Indonesian horror, a very B-movie style horror films. And I actually want to be one of that director when I was a kid, but eventually I end up as an artist because cinema history is long and also art history is big, it's fast. So I kind of gain more and more interest in outside the horror genre. Essentially, I always interested in this idea that fact or documentary object have a fictional element. And the fiction also has this factual element. So I'm interested in this in-betweenness. I see horror films or genre films as a methodology rather than like some sort of kind of like established concept. For example, I approach like stuff that may be very political, but from a perspective of how does this kind of like political issues or ecological issues is actually spoken through like horror genre.
Attempt 50. You have survived. Welcome to quantum immortality.
I'm always interested in time. And I think my interest in time is actually derived from my interest in science fiction. And the imaginations of science fiction is always playing with the idea of time, past, present, future. So I apply that also in my practice. The way I see the world is not only that I'm afraid of the future or I'm thinking about the future, but also sometimes I'm afraid of the past. There's a lot of this trauma and memory that you cannot actually heal. I'm Indonesians, and there's a trauma of a colonialism. And then also there's a trauma of a dictatorship. All of this trauma that comes from the past is actually still operating in present and possibly in the future. The future that we shape is actually shaped from the past, how we understand the past. One of the largest tin producer is Indonesia. From this small island that I do most of my work as well. It's called Bangka Island. The smartphone I use, all of the technology, the screen-based technology in the phone was taken from the thin metals in that island. And I tried to came to the island just to kind of understand the dynamics of this object and how it actually connected to the social and political and also the idea of logistics in the planet. The news that you told me is not that much different than today. Sure, I did it in 2019 or 2018, but it's not much different than what happened now. In the context of Kasiterit, for example, we want to change the whole mining problem stuff. From the kind of like a corporate company perspective, they want to introduce what they call it like ethical mining, but it's still a mining. You know, when you said an ethical mining, and then you still think about extractions. And extraction is not something that you can just like erase from the history. Extraction is basically colonialism. For example, we are here in Amsterdam. The reason why the Dutch came to like Indonesia, or like during that time it's called Dutch East Indies, because they want to extract spices, but also like minerals. That happens like 500 years ago. We still kind of like linger into these issues. How do you actually do ethical extractions? I'm still not sure whether we can still do that unless we kind of like degrowth. Nobody's like saying something about like, oh, we should slow down. Maybe we should produce less, so then we can actually let the planet to reproduce its own minerals, its own resources. I'm interested in thinking about animism, how we understand object based on like if the object has an inherent or like a soul or spirits inside. And I actually kind of like trying to connect it to capitalism, because capitalism thinks that all object is actually valuable, even nothingness. You can even sell nothingness. A lot of these cables now buried actually. Going back again to Indonesia, because Indonesia also the repository like of e-waste. It's a lot of like e-waste landfill is actually built in Indonesia, and then it actually comes from Japan, Korea, some of from China and Europe. So it's a big concern for me, but also it's poetically it's quite interesting, because most of this also made of tin. So it goes somewhere, and then now it goes back to the soil in Indonesia. And then I was thinking a lot about this idea of fossils in one of my works, where this thing becomes a fossils in the far, far future. Now it's from Gokma Gok. I kind of developed it when I was in South Korea. The figure of ghost comes from two ghost stories that I listened during that period. As I mentioned, one of the workers, the sea workers, was telling me about the appearance of a ghost in their cargo ship, because there's so many like Indonesian workers died, crashed by the cargo. I started to think a lot about like this presence of like the invisible labor that turned into a ghost because they were dying in the oceans. And then I was residency in Seoul, and during that time I was particularly interested with this company Samsung, because they are like bigger than life. You were born in like Samsung hospital and you die in Samsung funeral house. It's basically in your blood kind of thing. I found out they have a what they call it like a employee assistance program office. So it actually for the Samsung workers who have a depression, and they can call this office and they get like a 24 hours like therapies. And then at the same time, I was thinking that actually this is similar to what happened to the logistics people, because they're maybe for them it's more physical danger, but for the Samsung workers it's more mental danger. But it's still the same. It's a working accident. It's like your body, your safety is actually trapped by your workspace. And then I found a person who works in this company, which funny enough that she found a ghost in the company. So those whole ghosts is actually developed from that kind of like story. Indonesia, South Korea, we kind of like bonded with this idea of omnipresence of ghosts. And then we had the same historical events of dictatorship, for example, American CIA, like operations and all this kind of stuff, which is for me, it's still haunted. It reminds me of the work I did with fishermen. Pacific tuna came from also Indonesia. They're extracted by also Indonesian sea workers that works for like other companies. They went to the sea, the open ocean for like 6 months, 7 months, 8 months without going back to the land. Some people died on the way, and then when they died, they cannot bury them. So sometimes they just like put them in the water or even in the fridge with the fish. This invisible labor is basically means nothing for the company. They're just another object to be exploited. The company will play them the films that, oh, you shouldn't do this and that, otherwise then you get killed, instead of like really giving them some sort of safetyness and stuff like that. If you die in the ocean, that it's your fault. How do you deal with the situation when you have like a person that is on the boat that is dead? You cannot even burn them if you believe in this, some certain of belief system that you have to burn them. You're dying when you're doing this hard labor, and then you become one with the ocean. So that's kind of like the poeticness of that in the work. The actual commission is for me to make a sea chanty. In the West, sailors or even pirates, they have song that they sang. The commission is about that, but I, instead of like making this in relations to like romantic idea of the ocean and the singing and togetherness, I'm thinking a lot about this specific genre of music where a lot of the laborers were listening to. Actually, most of the lyrics is about this belonging to the land. I want to go back, I miss the land, I miss my family, and this kind of stuff. It's kind of like a form of escapism for many of the laborers in the open oceans. Their relations to the music is not like this masculine, like a pirates, but it's more like this a very sentimental and melancholy, and also nostalgia, because you're longing for the land, but now you're in the open ocean. So the only thing that you can do is just to listen to this music and cry. Helpful and harmful is in the same coins in technology. You cannot just like rely to AI, because then you actually dehumanize the relationship. And then we also have to distinguish between consciousness and intelligence, because intelligence is like a capability to solve problems, but consciousness is to feel pain, emotions. If AI cannot understand that, I'm not sure how actually AI could be engaged with people with mental illness, because you need to understand care more deeply. I feel the role of an artist is not that special, to be honest, for me. It's just the same role as like a pharmacist or like miners. It's part of the whole world that we inhabit. Most of my works are dealing with people that I encounter, and then they told their story. So I always exchange my story to them. You know, artistic practice or being an artist is actually more like an anthropologist. I'm actually don't really care when the audience don't get like what it's actually about, but I mostly care about the sensorial experience that they experience through my work. In regard to like whether they understand or like they care about the issue or the subject or the concept, that's kind of like secondary to me. First and foremost, cinema has to be a sensorial experience. You don't have to know or to understand it fully, but you can experience it as an aesthetic process.